Some people mistake kindness for weakness. They think your silence means surrender. They couldn't be more wrong. Those were the words I whispered to myself in the bathroom mirror that morning, my reflection staring back with newfound determination. Little did I know that by the end of that day, I'd prove those words in ways I never imagined possible. My name is Ophelia, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes being unapologetically yourself is the only way to survive in a world full of spotlight thieves. The morning started like any other at Meridian Creative Agency. Steam rose from my coffee cup as I settled into my desk, the familiar hum of productivity filling the open-plan office. I'd been working there for 3 years, steadily building my reputation as a reliable graphic designer with an eye for innovation. My portfolio spoke for itself. Clean designs, satisfied clients, and a growing list of successful campaigns under my belt. But if I'm being honest, I'd always been the quiet type. The one who let her work do the talking while others took center stage during presentations. I preferred the shadows, the comfortable anonymity of being known for quality rather than showmanship. That was my first mistake. 3 months earlier, management had hired Celeste Blackwood, a whirlwind of perfectly styled blonde hair and razor-sharp ambition. She swept into our department like she owned the place, her resume glittering with prestigious agency names and award nominations. Within weeks, she positioned herself as the unofficial spokesperson for our team, her voice rising above others in every meeting, her laugh echoing across the office like a carefully orchestrated performance. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of admiration and unease. There was something magnetic about Celeste, the way she commanded attention, how she could pitch an idea with such conviction that you'd forget it wasn't originally yours. Our manager, James, seemed particularly taken with her approach. Suddenly, she was getting the high-profile assignments, the face-to-face client meetings, the recognition that others had worked years to achieve. But I told myself it was fine. I wasn't in this for the glory. I was here for the craft. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I watched Celeste's star rise while mine seemed to dim by comparison. The breaking point came with the Morrison account. Morrison Industries was the kind of client that could make or break careers. They were launching a revolutionary sustainable packaging line and needed a complete rebrand. Logo, marketing materials, digital presence, the works. It was the biggest account our agency had landed in years, and everyone knew that whoever led this project would be fast-tracked for promotion. When James announced the project in our Monday morning meeting, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement in my chest. This was exactly the kind of challenge I'd been preparing for my entire career. Sustainable design was my passion. I'd done 3 major projects in that space, including an award-winning campaign for Green Tech Solutions just last year. I stayed after the meeting, approaching James's office with a carefully prepared pitch. I'd spent the weekend researching Morrison Industries, sketching initial concepts, even reaching out to my contacts in the sustainable packaging industry for insights. James, I'd love to discuss the Morrison project. I began, my portfolio tucked under my arm. I have some ideas that I think could really resonate with their target demographic. He looked up from his computer, his expression polite but distracted. That's great, Ophelia. Why don't you put together some initial concepts and we'll see where they fit into the overall strategy. Initial concepts. Supporting materials. I felt my heart sink, but I nodded professionally. Of course. When will the team assignments be announced? Actually, I was planning to discuss that this afternoon. Celeste has already submitted some promising initial work, and given her experience with high-profile rebrands. I didn't need him to finish the sentence. The writing was on the wall, carved in bold letters that spelled out my relegation to the background once again. But this time felt different. This time, something inside me snapped. The official announcement came Tuesday morning. Celeste would be leading the Morrison project, with supporting team members to be assigned throughout the week. She accepted the news with gracious humility, thanking James for the opportunity while promising to deliver exceptional results. I watched her performance from my desk, noting how she managed to look both surprised and prepared simultaneously. It was masterful, really. The way she'd positioned herself as the obvious choice while maintaining the illusion that it was all a delightful surprise. I'm so excited to dive into this project, she announced to the team, her voice carrying that perfect blend of enthusiasm and authority. I've already begun developing some innovative concepts that I think Morrison will love. Of course, I'll be relying on all of your expertise to bring this vision to life. Our expertise. Our support. Our work to elevate her vision. I spent the rest of that week watching Celeste orchestrate what could only be described as a masterclass in credit appropriation. She held brainstorming sessions where she solicited ideas from the entire team, then presented refined versions of those concepts as her own innovations. She scheduled individual meetings with each team member, mining us for insights and expertise that would later appear in her presentations without attribution. The worst part wasn't the theft itself, it was how smoothly she executed it. There were no dramatic confrontations or obvious plagiarism. Instead, she employed a subtle alchemy that transformed our contributions into her breakthroughs. A suggestion became her insight. A design element became her creative vision. A strategic approach became her innovative thinking. I found myself staying late most nights, pouring my heart into concepts and designs that I knew would ultimately bear Celeste's name. My sustainable packaging expertise became the foundation for her environmental messaging strategy. My color theory research informed her brand palette decisions. My typography experiments evolved into her distinctive visual approach. The project timeline was aggressive. Morrison wanted to see initial concepts within 2 weeks, with a full presentation to their executive team the following week. As the deadline approached, Celeste's demands on the team intensified. She scheduled daily check-ins, weekend work sessions, and collaborative meetings that felt more like extraction operations. It was during one of these sessions, late on a Thursday night, that I witnessed the moment that would change everything. I'd been working on a particularly complex logo animation, trying to capture the essence of Morrison's sustainability message in a dynamic visual sequence. The concept had come to me in a flash of inspiration, a design that literally grew from the ground up, with packaging elements transforming into plants, symbolizing the circular nature of their new materials. As I refined the final frames, I heard Celeste on a phone call in the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and her voice carried clearly across the empty office. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, I'm very excited about tomorrow's presentation," she was saying. "I've developed a particularly innovative animation concept that I think will perfectly capture your brand's evolution. It's this beautiful transformation sequence where the packaging literally becomes part of nature." My fingers froze on the keyboard. She was describing my work, my exact concept, my visual metaphor, my hours of meticulous animation, to the client as her own creation. Something inside me crystallized in that moment. The quiet acceptance, the team player mentality, the belief that good work would eventually be recognized. All of it crumbled, replaced by a cold, clear understanding of exactly what was happening and what I needed to do about it. I didn't confront Celeste that night. Instead, I went home and spent the hours until dawn doing something I should have done months earlier. Documenting everything. Email timestamps showing when I'd sent concepts to the team. File metadata proving when I'd created designs. Screenshots of brainstorming documents with my original ideas. Saved chat logs from our collaborative sessions. Every piece of evidence that proved the true origin of what had become Celeste's vision for the Morrison account. But more than that, I began preparing for something I'd never attempted before. Stepping fully into the spotlight instead of supporting someone else's performance there. The Morrison presentation was scheduled for the following Friday. Celeste had planned an elaborate showing in our main conference room, complete with printed materials, a digital presentation, and what she described as some exciting visual elements that would demonstrate our creative approach. Those visual elements, of course, included my animation, my logo concepts, my packaging designs, and my strategic framework, all woven together into a narrative that positioned her as the creative mastermind behind the entire campaign. I spent the week leading up to the presentation in a state of focused preparation. I refined my documentation, practiced my talking points, and most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for what was about to happen. This wasn't just about reclaiming credit for my work, it was about fundamentally changing how I showed up in the world. Thursday night, I stayed late at the office, ostensibly to help with final preparations for the Morrison meeting. Celeste was in full director mode, orchestrating every detail of the presentation while the rest of us handled the logistics. "Ophelia, could you make sure the animation files are loaded correctly on the presentation laptop?" she asked, not looking up from her notes. "I want to make sure my sequence plays smoothly tomorrow." Her sequence. Her animation. Her work. I nodded and began setting up the technical components, but I also did something else. I prepared a small surprise for the following day's presentation. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp energy that signals important events. The Morrison executives, 3 sharp-suited individuals including CEO Patricia Morrison herself, arrived promptly at 10 a.m., filling our conference room with an air of serious business. Celeste had dressed for the occasion in a power suit that projected confidence and competence. She greeted the clients warmly, establishing the kind of personal rapport that would make her subsequent presentation more impactful. James hovered nearby, clearly proud of his star performer and the impression she was making. I took my assigned seat in the back of the room, laptop open, ostensibly there to provide technical support if needed. The rest of the team filled the remaining chairs, ready to watch Celeste work her magic. "Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today," Celeste began, her voice smooth and assured. "I'm incredibly excited to share the creative vision we've developed for Morrison Industries rebrand. This project has been a passion of mine from day one, and I believe the concepts we've created will truly revolutionize how your customers perceive sustainable packaging." She clicked to the first slide, an overview of Morrison's brand challenges and opportunities. The content was solid, reflecting the team's collective research, but presented entirely as her own analysis. "When I first began researching your company," she continued, "I was struck by the gap between your innovative products and your current market positioning." I listened to her weave together insights that had emerged from our team discussions, strategic frameworks that I developed based on my sustainable packaging expertise, and positioning recommendations that reflected weeks of collaborative thinking, all presented as her individual brilliance. The presentation continued through brand strategy, target audience analysis, and competitive positioning. With each slide, I watched Celeste claim ownership of ideas and insights that belonged to multiple team members, but I remained silent. This wasn't the moment for my intervention. That moment came when she reached the creative concepts. "Now, I'd like to share what I consider the heart of this rebrand," Celeste said, her voice rising with enthusiasm. "The visual identity I've created for Morrison Industries reflects both your innovative spirit and your commitment to environmental responsibility." She clicked to reveal my logo design, the elegant interplay of typography and sustainable imagery that I'd spent countless hours perfecting. The Morrison executives leaned forward, clearly impressed by the sophisticated visual approach. "This mark," Celeste explained, "represents the transformation that Morrison is leading in the packaging industry. I wanted to create something that felt both established and revolutionary, traditional yet forward-thinking." She continued through the brand guidelines, color palette, and typography selections, all my work, all presented as her creative vision. The executives were clearly engaged, asking detailed questions about design rationale and implementation strategies that she answered with confidence, drawing on the explanations I'd provided during our team sessions. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. "And finally," Celeste announced, "I'd like to show you a special animation concept that I believe perfectly captures the essence of what Morrison Industries represents." She clicked to start my animation, the packaging-to-plant transformation that had taken me weeks to perfect. The room fell silent as the sequence played, the Morrison executives watching intently as sustainable packaging materials morphed into growing plants, symbolizing the circular nature of their business model. "This animation," Celeste said as the sequence concluded, "represents my vision of how Morrison Industries is literally giving life back to the planet through innovative packaging solutions." Patricia Morrison herself spoke for the first time since the presentation began. "That's remarkable," she said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "How did you develop this concept?" It was the perfect setup, and Celeste didn't hesitate. "Well, as I was researching your company's environmental impact, I became fascinated by the idea of packaging as part of nature's cycle rather than separate from it. I spent weeks sketching different approaches before this transformation concept emerged. It required extensive technical development to bring the vision to life, but I felt it was essential to show rather than just tell the story of Morrison's innovation." She was describing my creative process, my weeks of development, my technical implementation, as if she'd experienced every breakthrough and overcome every challenge personally. That's when I stood up. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cutting through the room's attentive silence, "but I need to clarify something important." Every head turned toward me. Celeste's expression flickered between confusion and alarm, while James looked distinctly uncomfortable. The Morrison executives appeared curious about this unexpected interruption. I opened my laptop and clicked a few keys, connecting to the room's presentation system. "Patricia, you asked about the development process for that animation. I'd like to show you the actual timeline of its creation." My screen appeared on the main display, showing a detailed breakdown of file creation dates, revision histories, and development stages. Each timestamp clearly showed my name as the creator, with the earliest concepts dating back 3 weeks. This animation wasn't developed by Celeste, I continued, my voice steady and clear. I created it, along with the majority of the creative concepts you've seen today. The room's energy shifted dramatically. Celeste's face went pale, while James looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. The Morrison executives exchanged glances, clearly trying to process this unexpected development. I have documentation showing the original creation of every major element in this presentation, I continued, clicking through my prepared evidence. Email timestamps, file metadata, original sketches, revision histories. All of it proves that while this may be Celeste's presentation, it's largely my creative work. Patricia Morrison leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. This is concerning, she said finally. Could you walk us through your actual role in this project? And so I did. For the next 20 minutes, I presented the real story of the Morrison rebrand development. Not as a supporting team member contributing to someone else's vision, but as the primary creative force behind the concepts they just praised. I showed them my original sketches, my strategic framework documents, my animation development process. I explained the sustainable packaging expertise that had informed the environmental messaging strategy, the research that had shaped the positioning recommendations, the design thinking that had guided the visual identity development. Most importantly, I presented alternative concepts and strategic approaches that went beyond what Celeste had shown them. Deeper thinking, more innovative solutions, and creative directions that truly leveraged my years of experience in sustainable design. The silence that followed my presentation was deafening. Patricia Morrison sat perfectly still, her business-sharp eyes moving between me, Celeste, and James as she processed the implications of what she'd just witnessed. Celeste finally found her voice, but it came out smaller than her usual commanding tone. This is a misunderstanding, she began, but Patricia held up a hand to stop her. Ms. Blackwood, Patricia said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of executive decision-making, are you claiming that you personally created the animation we just saw? Celeste's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that would somehow reshape reality. The creative development was collaborative, but the vision, the strategic direction. That's not what you said 5 minutes ago, Patricia interrupted. You specifically described spending weeks sketching concepts and overcoming technical challenges to bring your personal vision to life. The Morrison CEO turned to me. Ophelia, is it? Can you demonstrate that you personally created this work? I nodded and pulled up my animation software, opening the original project files. These are the source files, created on my personal laptop using my licensed software. You can see the layer structure, the individual elements I created, the timeline of when each component was developed. I walked them through the creative process step by step, from initial concept sketches to final rendering. Every element was documented, time-stamped, and clearly attributed to my work. It wasn't just evidence. It was a masterclass in sustainable design thinking that went far deeper than anything Celeste could have presented. Moreover, I continued, feeling confidence building in my voice, I can show you additional concepts and strategic approaches that weren't included in today's presentation. Directions that I believe would be even more effective for Morrison's market positioning. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Patricia Morrison smiled, not the polite business smile she'd been wearing all morning, but a genuine expression of appreciation. Please, she said, show us what else you're thinking. For the next 30 minutes, I presented ideas I'd been developing parallel to the official project. Concepts that pushed beyond conventional sustainable packaging messaging into truly revolutionary territory. Interactive design elements that would engage consumers in Morrison's environmental mission. Strategic partnerships that could amplify their market impact. Innovation frameworks that would position them as thought leaders rather than just product providers. It was the presentation I should have been giving from the beginning. Not supporting someone else's interpretation of my work, but sharing my actual vision for what Morrison Industries could become. The Morrison executives were clearly engaged, asking detailed questions and pushing me to elaborate on implementation strategies. This wasn't just about reclaiming credit anymore. It was about demonstrating the depth of thinking and creativity that had been hidden behind Celeste's performance. James, meanwhile, looked like he was watching his carefully constructed team dynamic collapse in real time. Several times he tried to redirect the conversation back to the collaborative nature of creative work, But Patricia Morrison seemed far more interested in understanding the actual source of the ideas she was evaluating. When I finished my impromptu presentation, Patricia sat back in her chair with an expression of someone who just solved a puzzle that had been bothering her. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "Not just good design work, but strategic thinking that understands our industry and our challenges at a deeper level." She turned to James. "I assume Ophelia will be our primary point of contact moving forward?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. James looked at Celeste, who was staring at the table, then back at Patricia Morrison. He was trapped between his previous decision to give Celeste the lead and the obvious preference his most important client had just expressed. "Of course," he said finally. "We'll make sure Ophelia is fully empowered to guide the project development." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Actually," she said, "I'd like to discuss something else. We're launching a sustainability consulting division next quarter, and we're looking for someone with exactly this kind of expertise to lead our creative strategy. Would you be interested in exploring that opportunity, Ophelia?" The offer hung in the air like a lifeline I hadn't even known I needed. A chance to not just reclaim my work, but to step into a role that would finally match my capabilities and ambitions. "I would be very interested," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I walked them through the creative process step by step, from initial concept sketches to final rendering. Every element was documented, time-stamped, and clearly attributed to my work. It wasn't just evidence. It was a masterclass in sustainable design thinking that went far deeper than anything Celeste could have presented. "Moreover," I continued, feeling confidence building in my voice, "I can show you additional concepts and strategic approaches that weren't included in today's presentation. Directions that I believe would be even more effective for Morrison's market positioning." What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Patricia Morrison smiled. Not the polite business smile she'd been wearing all morning, but a genuine expression of appreciation. "Please," she said, "show us what else you're thinking." For the next 30 minutes, I presented ideas I'd been developing parallel to the official project. Concepts that pushed beyond conventional sustainable packaging messaging into truly revolutionary territory. Interactive design elements that would engage consumers in Morrison's environmental mission. Strategic partnerships that could amplify their market impact. Innovation frameworks that would position them as thought leaders rather than just product providers. It was the presentation I should have been giving from the beginning. Not supporting someone else's interpretation of my work, but sharing my actual vision for what Morrison Industries could become. The Morrison executives were clearly engaged, asking detailed questions and pushing me to elaborate on implementation strategies. This wasn't just about reclaiming credit anymore. It was about demonstrating the depth of thinking and creativity that had been hidden behind Celeste's performance. James, meanwhile, looked like he was watching his carefully constructed team dynamic collapse in real time. Several times he tried to redirect the conversation back to the collaborative nature of creative work. But Patricia Morrison seemed far more interested in understanding the actual source of the ideas she was evaluating. When I finished my impromptu presentation, Patricia sat back in her chair with an expression of someone who just solved a puzzle that had been bothering her. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "Not just good design work, but strategic thinking that understands our industry and our challenges at a deeper level." She turned to James. "I assume Ophelia will be our primary point of contact moving forward?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. James looked at Celeste, who was staring at the table, then back at Patricia Morrison. He was trapped between his previous decision to give Celeste the lead and the obvious preference his most important client had just expressed. "Of course," he said finally. "We'll make sure Ophelia is fully empowered to guide the project development." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Actually," she said, "I'd like to discuss something else. We're launching a sustainability consulting division next quarter, and we're looking for someone with exactly this kind of expertise to lead our creative strategy. Would you be interested in exploring that opportunity, Ophelia?" The offer hung in the air like a lifeline I hadn't even known I needed. A chance to not just reclaim my work, but to step into a role that would finally match my capabilities and ambitions. "I would be very interested," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The Morrison executives left that afternoon with a completely different understanding of who they'd be working with and what they could expect from the project. Patricia Morrison made sure to get my direct contact information and scheduled a follow-up conversation about their consulting opportunity for the following week. As soon as the conference room door closed behind them, the real reckoning began. James stood at the head of the table, his expression cycling between anger, embarrassment, and calculation. Celeste remained seated, staring at her hands, all traces of her usual commanding presence evaporated. That was... James began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to address what had just happened. Unprofessional, Celeste said quietly. What you did was completely unprofessional. I turned to face her directly. What I did was tell the truth about my own work. What you've been doing for months is unprofessional. I never claimed that I did every piece of work myself. Yes, I interrupted. You absolutely did. 20 minutes ago, you told Patricia Morrison that you personally spent weeks sketching concepts and overcoming technical challenges to create that animation. You described it as your vision, your development process, your creative breakthrough. Celeste's face flushed, but she maintained her defensive posture. Creative work is collaborative. Everyone knows that. I was presenting the team's work. Under your name, I replied, taking credit for insights and innovations that you didn't contribute to. That's not collaboration, that's appropriation. James finally found his voice. Regardless of the attribution issues, he said carefully, the way you handled this was inappropriate. You should have come to me first, worked through proper channels. I looked at him with a kind of clarity that only comes from finally seeing a situation for exactly what it is. James, I did come to you. Multiple times. I expressed interest in leading this project. I provided expertise and strategic insights. I contributed countless hours of work. And you consistently positioned all of that as supporting Celeste's vision rather than recognizing my contributions. That's not. It's exactly what happened, I continued. And honestly, after watching you overlook my qualifications for this project despite my 3 years of excellent work and specific expertise in sustainable design, I realized that working through proper channels wasn't going to change anything. The truth of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. James couldn't deny that he'd given Celeste the lead despite my more relevant experience. He couldn't argue that my contributions had been properly recognized. And he couldn't ignore the fact that his most important client had just expressed a clear preference for working with me directly. What happens now? Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James rubbed his forehead, clearly calculating the political and business implications of the afternoon's events. We'll need to restructure the project leadership, he said finally. Obviously, Ophelia will take the lead on Morrison Industries, given their expressed preference. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. I'd gotten what I wanted, but only by forcing a confrontation that had left everyone bruised. As the meeting broke up, Celeste lingered in the conference room. For a moment, I thought she might apologize or attempt to explain her behavior. Instead, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. I underestimated you, she said simply. You assumed I wouldn't fight back, I replied. That was your mistake. The following weeks brought changes I hadn't fully anticipated. Word of the Morrison presentation spread through the office with the speed of whispered gossip, creating a complex dynamic of reactions from my colleagues. Some were supportive, congratulating me on finally getting the recognition I deserved. Others seemed uncomfortable with what they viewed as dramatic office politics. A few appeared to be reconsidering their own professional relationships, wondering if they'd been giving away too much credit for their contributions. But the most significant change was internal. The quiet, accommodating version of myself that had spent 3 years supporting other people's success was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The Morrison project moved forward under my leadership, and the difference was immediately apparent. Instead of managing team contributions to support someone else's vision, I was able to integrate everyone's expertise into a coherent strategy that leveraged each person's strengths. The work improved dramatically because it was finally being guided by someone with deep knowledge of the subject matter rather than someone skilled at presenting other people's ideas. More importantly, my conversations with Patricia Morrison about their consulting opportunity were progressing better than I'd hoped. The role would involve leading creative strategy for their new sustainability division, working with major corporations to develop environmentally responsible branding and marketing approaches. It was exactly the kind of position I'd been preparing for my entire career. the intersection of creative work and environmental impact that I was genuinely passionate about. James, to his credit, handled the transition professionally. He never explicitly acknowledged the systemic issues that had led to the Morrison confrontation, but his behavior toward me changed noticeably. He began including me in strategic conversations, seeking my input on major decisions, and generally treating me like the senior professional I'd always been rather than a supporting team member. Celeste, meanwhile, seemed to retreat into herself. The commanding presence that had defined her first months at the agency was replaced by a more subdued approach. She still did good work, but she no longer dominated meetings or positioned herself as the team's unofficial spokesperson. Whether this represented genuine reflection on her behavior or simply a strategic adjustment to new circumstances, I couldn't tell. 3 months later, I was sitting in Morrison Industries' executive conference room, presenting quarterly results for their rebrand campaign to the same executives who had witnessed my confrontation with Celeste. The numbers were exceptional. Brand recognition up 40%, customer engagement dramatically improved, and most importantly, consumer perception of Morrison as an environmental leader had increased significantly. The animation that had started this whole journey was being featured in industry publications as an example of innovative sustainable design. These results exceed our most optimistic projections, Patricia Morrison said, reviewing the data I'd presented. Your strategic approach has transformed not just our brand, but our entire market positioning. I nodded, feeling the satisfaction of work that was both successful and genuinely meaningful. The key was aligning your visual identity with authentic environmental action rather than just messaging. Consumers can tell the difference between genuine commitment and marketing speak. Which brings us to our next conversation, Patricia continued. We'd like to formalize our consulting arrangement and discuss expanding your role in our sustainability division. The offer was even better than I'd hoped. Not just a position, but the opportunity to build something new from the ground up. A chance to combine creative work with environmental impact at a scale I'd never imagined possible. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from Meridian Creative Agency. James accepted it graciously, acknowledging that the Morrison opportunity was too good to pass up. Several of my colleagues expressed interest in staying in touch, recognizing that I might be in a position to send interesting projects their way. Celeste and I had one final conversation before my departure. She approached my desk on my last day, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I want to apologize, she said quietly. What I did was wrong, and the way I handled team collaboration was problematic. I looked up from packing my personal items, surprised by the directness of her admission. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, she continued. And I realized that I was so focused on establishing myself quickly that I lost sight of basic professional respect. That's not who I want to be. It was the conversation we probably should have had months earlier, but I appreciated her willingness to address it directly. I accept your apology, I replied, and I hope you find a way to use your talents that doesn't require diminishing other people's contributions. She nodded, looking genuinely thoughtful. I think I'm still learning how to be confident without being competitive in unhealthy ways. That's something worth figuring out, I agreed. 6 months into my role at Morrison Industries, I've had time to reflect on the events that brought me here. The confrontation in the conference room could have ended my career. Challenging a colleague publicly, bypassing management hierarchy, forcing a client meeting into uncomfortable territory. Instead, it became the turning point that transformed my professional life. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for my work, though that was certainly part of it. The deeper realization was about the difference between supporting other people's success and enabling your own diminishment. There's a fine line between being a team player and being taken advantage of, and I'd spent too many years on the wrong side of that line. In my new role, I lead a team of 12 creative professionals working on sustainability initiatives for Fortune 500 companies. It's the kind of position that requires both creative vision and strategic leadership. Exactly the combination of skills I'd been developing for years but had never been fully recognized for. More importantly, I've learned how to recognize and develop other people's talents without appropriating their contributions. When someone on my team creates exceptional work, I make sure they present it to clients directly. When strategic insights emerge from collaborative discussions, I'm careful to attribute them correctly. When junior team members show innovative thinking, I create opportunities for them to take leadership roles on appropriate projects. It's not just about being ethical, though that's certainly important. It's about understanding that sustainable success comes from building other people up rather than diminishing them. The spotlight is big enough for multiple people to shine. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never confronted Celeste that day. Would I still be at Meridian Creative Agency, quietly supporting other people's visions while my own capabilities remained hidden? Would I have eventually found the courage to claim my rightful place, or would I have continued indefinitely in that comfortable but limiting role? The truth is, I was ready for that confrontation long before it happened. Years of expertise, months of watching my work get attributed to someone else, weeks of preparing documentation. It wasn't a moment of impulse, but the culmination of a process that had been building for a long time. The spotlight thief showed me something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I'd been complicit in my own invisibility. By consistently choosing to support rather than lead, by prioritizing harmony over recognition, by believing that good work would naturally be rewarded, I'd created the conditions that allowed someone like Celeste to appropriate my contributions. Taking back my spotlight wasn't just about reclaiming credit for my work. It was about finally becoming the professional I'd always had the capability to be. It was about understanding that sometimes, being unapologetically yourself is the only way to get the recognition and opportunities you deserve. And I've never apologized for it since. The Morrison Industries Sustainability Division has now worked with over 50 major corporations to develop environmentally responsible branding strategies. Our innovative approaches to sustainable design have been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Sustainable Brands magazine. Most importantly, our work is helping drive real environmental change in industries that desperately need it. As for Celeste, she's still at Meridian Creative Agency, where by all accounts she's developed into a more collaborative team leader. We occasionally see each other at industry events, where we maintain polite professional relationships. She's never tried to take credit for work that wasn't hers again. And me? I'm exactly where I belong, in the spotlight I earned, leading work that matters, and making sure that everyone on my team gets the recognition they deserve for their contributions. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. They think your silence means surrender. But sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when your worth is being diminished. Sometimes, being unapologetically yourself is the only way to claim the success you've been working toward all along.